So we all know home affordability is just out of control nowadays. So what's it really going to take to be able to afford that down payment?
Stop wasting money on that dumb shit and instead put it in investment. I know it's tempting, you'll spend it and be broke again.
So welcome back to our channel, guys. I'm your bro Ryan.
And I'm your bro Taylor.
And in today's video, we're talking about how you're going to need to adjust your budget when you're saving for that house you're going to live in. So a common rule people follow or have heard of when they're looking to get into budgeting is the 50-30-20 rule. We're going to talk about how you're going to need to adjust that. That's just not something you can keep in order to afford a house, because you're going to need to adjust because you're saving for that large down payment.
So the changes we're talking about are ones I implemented myself in order to be able to afford my first home and the down payment that I needed. So the numbers we're giving you, while they may seem a bit out there and like pretty extreme, are things that, you kind of have to do in today's market to be able to afford something.
Okay, so let's jump into some numbers here. So to start off with your needs, you're going to need to cut your needs as best as possible and live as frugally as possible. You're not going to get too insane where you're living out of a cardboard house, but at the same time, maybe you pick up a roommate, maybe you move in with your parents, maybe you shop at a different grocery store. Just there's so many options, but you want to cut it as much as possible. So dropping those needs to more like 35 to 45% of your income would be fantastic. But for the purpose of this example we're going to have later, we're going to put it at 42%.
Next in the 50-30-20 is that 30% that you're assigning to your wants. In reality, you are going to have to cut back on these. You just can't really afford to spend 30% of your income on going out and gifts and all these little gadgets and everything. Now, we don't want you to cut it out completely because at some point you will burn out and lose motivation. So you don't want to diminish your quality of life, but you do want to be spending closer to around 20% towards wants instead of that 30%. And the more you can tolerate to cut it, the better, frankly. If you're fine and you have some cheap hobbies or anything, you're able to get your wants down to 5, 10%, all the better.
And to be honest, cutting that wants too low, just like Taylor said, can cause burnout. So we don't want you to get burned out. But at the same time, it's not like you're doing this because you have to and there's no way out. You're doing this because you want to buy that house.
Yeah.
So in the end, you're still rewarding yourself. You're still getting something you want. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of think of it that way. You're using that want and putting it in a different spot temporarily until you get that next house.
Yeah, it's all about shifting your mindset.
Okay, so finally looking at that 20%, that 20% goes to savings and debt. Obviously, we're going to need to raise that as much as possible. And based on the number earlier, 42% needs, 20% wants, we are now left with 38% towards savings and debt. And again, this category, the higher you can go on this one, meaning the lower you go on the other two categories, the better, because it means you can save quicker, you can pay off your debt quicker, and those are things we love to hear. So if you have debt, especially high debt, you should be applying all of that towards that debt. Your credit score and your amount of debt you pay every month affects what size mortgage you can get. So there's so many factors that go into it, but all in all, the final say on this is pay off that debt.
Yeah, and I know some of you are probably thinking that 38% is just impossible in today's market. I completely understand where you're coming from. You do have to get very creative and take somewhat drastic measures in these other categories to be able to reach this measurement right here. But it is something that I myself was able to do. At the most, I was saving just over 40% by either living with friends or, I was living in like a buddy's laundry room for $200 a month. I was living with family at a, very low rate. I was cutting back on my wants. I wasn't going out as much. I was cooking a lot at home, which, I'm not the biggest fan of cooking, but it is cheaper than going out. So you do have to change your lifestyle in order to be able to afford something new, like a home. So those are measures that you do have to take. And we're about to go into an example of an average income and what we would expect, some average budgeting and expenses to be. So you can see the measures that you have to go to and just the reality of what it takes to afford a home.
So let's say you want to buy a $300,000 home. We know that that's not the average price, or in many areas, not even close to the average priced home. This is just for this example, we threw out $300,000. And let's say your household income is $70,000. Accounting for taxes, you roughly take home, so after taxes, monthly, your family has $4,500 to spend. And then we went ahead and did a little bit of research and found out that the average personal savings rate in the United States is 5%. So 5% of that $4,500 we have to spend is $225. Do you want to know how long it would take you to save 10% for a down payment on a $300,000 home with $225? Yeah, that's right. A really, really long time. It would take you over 11 years just to save for that down payment. And then you have another 30 years to pay down that mortgage.
Now, it goes without saying that number is just not appealing to anyone, thinking that it's going to take you nearly a dozen years. I don't like the word dozen.
Nearly a dozen. I didn't like that either.
Says that?
That caught me off guard. Nearly a dozen years. Dozens are
So
eggs, not
awkward,
years.
I know.
I thought you were gonna say nearly a decade.
Yeah.
Or a little over a decade.
Yeah. Let me run that back with a less awkward word. And it goes without saying that that number is just not appealing to anyone. No one wants to be saving for over 11 years to be able to afford a home. So that's why these numbers in this video seem so drastic, but they are necessary.
And to be honest, saving for 11 years for a $300,000 house, at that point, that house is worth way more or is way more expensive that you're going to have to keep saving. So that savings rate is just way too low at that income.
So on the flip side, if you saved at that 38% rate that we mentioned in this video, you'd be saving a whopping $1,710 a month. I know that seems unreasonable, but it is the numbers that we kind of have to reach to be able to afford a home. You could then have that 10% down payment saved in just under a year and a half, which obviously is a much more palatable timeline. I mean, a year and a half isn't unreasonable. I know that some people are like, oh, I was hoping to afford a house in 6 months. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality. Maybe, 10 years ago you could do that, but in today's market where houses are just so unaffordable, interest rates are still high, these are the numbers that you kind of have to deal with.
Or you're going to have to cut your needs even further, cut your wants even further, which is going to be a rough life, beans and toast for a while. And then your savings rate can go even higher, which cuts down that time it's going to take you, obviously, to save.
Yeah, or that thing that everyone loves to say that seems so simple is increase your income.
Yeah.
Now, that is a great option, so if you can't do that, we're not knocking that by any means.
And also, please let us know in the comments how you did it, because we could use it.
Yeah. So I know these are pretty drastic measures in order to be able to afford a home. It's just being realistic. Now, also being realistic, once you've bought a home, this budgeting rules and, the 50, 30, 20, all these numbers completely shift once you're paying for a mortgage and everything. Your, obviously, needs go up. Your savings will probably go down. So if you'd be interested in us showing you those numbers kind of based off personal experience and just what we think that the average person would probably have to deal with, we'd be more than happy to go into that video. We'd also show the math in that. So leave a comment down below if that's something that interests you. Now, whether you watch that upcoming video or not, we do encourage you to kind of calculate what you expect your budget to be post house buy, as in the time in which you own a home. Because again, these numbers shift. You got to be able to look at long-term affordability. You don't want to spend the max amount that you get pre-approved for in a mortgage. Now, the bank is saying this is what you can afford. That may not actually be what you can afford. They're trying to get the most money out of you. You need to keep in mind your future and what's best for you and your family.
Absolutely. So to sum up this video, leave a ton of comments. No, as always, hopefully you guys got something out of this video, and we love making these videos. And as always, leave comments for future content you want to see, anything you want us to dive deep on, anything you have questions about. Always remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch our next video.
Stop wasting money on that dumb shit and instead put it in investment. I know it's tempting, you'll spend it and be broke again.